One anthropologist says the recent civil unrest in KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng have a historical context, particularly if we relate them to the prevailing political, economic and social conditions. The COVID-19 pandemic, corruption allegations against high-profile leaders, a lack of service delivery, skyrocketing unemployment and poverty are but a few factors at play. For more on this, we're joined by University of the Free State Anthropology Department Professor Theodore Petrus. Prof, good evening. And thank you so much for your time tonight. As your article says then that the recent events, we cannot view them in isolation. We have to attach a historical context to this.
Yes, good evening to you and to the viewers. When social events like what we witnessed over the last few weeks, when those things happen in society, very rarely do they occur in a vacuum. And what tends to happen is that when these incidences unfold and the mind of the public, the population, is captured by the media, showing us the events as they are unfolding, it's very easy to get caught up in what is happening right now. And when trying to focus exclusively on the anarchy and chaos that we observe, it's very easy to feel overwhelmed in terms of trying to figure out what is really going on in society. Why is this happening? But as soon as you start looking at the wider context, then I like to use the analogy of a jigsaw puzzle. So whatever event is happening is just one piece of the puzzle. And you have to take that one piece and see where it fits in with all other incidences or similar events that have occurred in the past and even in the present. And then once you do that, once you fit the pieces together, you then get a better sense of what the picture is that is unfolding. And once we see the bigger picture, then it does help a little bit for us to understand why things are happening as they are happening, particularly events like what we've witnessed over the past few weeks.
And how much of this would you attribute to the incarceration of the former president, especially because some of them are saying that it was because of this that they took to the streets, but others then say no, in fact, it is because we don't have jobs, we've got nothing to eat, we just simply want something to eat. So how much of it then, when you assess the situation, would you put on the doorstep of those that are demanding that former President Jacob Zuma be freed?
Well, as I said, if one looks at the bigger context, then one can see that there are various other issues, various other factors that could be having a direct or even indirect impact on what we see unfolding. Now, while the incarceration of the former president may have perhaps been the catalyst for this recent spate of violent riots and looting, it certainly is not the only factor that we need to take into account. As I said in the opinion piece that I wrote, there are many other factors, some of them recent, some of them have been with us for decades, that I believe have informed the context that has led to what we see happening in society. Because all of these events, if we look at them in their proper context, unemployment, the lockdowns, people losing their livelihoods, people losing their businesses and their incomes because of the lockdowns, people not really knowing what sense to make of what's going on. It does tend to create a lot of frustration in the minds of the ordinary citizens. And sometimes it might just take a spark or a catalyst, like, for example, the incarceration of the former president, to set everything in motion. And then it's not just about people responding or reacting to one particular event, but they are reacting to all of these factors that have been causing this buildup of frustration over time.
And it could also be the frustration then of the lockdown like we've seen in some countries like the UK and Germany as well.
Correct. And that brings us to another issue, and that is what exactly is the purpose of these lockdowns? And if we see what's happening in other countries, we can see that South Africa is by no means unique in terms of how people are reacting to these lockdowns. And there are some people who are arguing and saying that this actually is basically the systematic erosion of people's basic rights and freedoms, and that this is something that is going to continue over time, and that we are actually seeing a systematic normalization of the kind of anarchy and chaos that we are witnessing, not just in South Africa, but also in other countries and other parts of the world. So there are all kinds of speculations that one can make. There are even some ideas that could be put forward that some might regard as conspiracy theories. But it does cause us to have to ask some critical questions and do some critical thinking about what really is going on. And if we see this and we look at the contradictions and, we start joining the dots, then the bigger picture that emerges might be one that we perhaps never thought we could possibly see in this country. But the picture that emerges is exactly what it is that has become the reality of what we're dealing with in South Africa.
Now, for some people to be able to voice their concerns, it's important for them that they really make their voices heard. But sadly, this may even happen through violent means. Others have said that South Africa has a history of protests, and it's no surprise then that, some South Africans may choose this particular form of communicating with those in power. But others are saying we're in a democracy. Things should not be, happening in this particular manner. Would you see these violent eruptions as a possible signal that those in power may then be continuing to be widening the gap between themselves and those who are at the grassroots levels?
I'm glad that you said it and that I didn't have to say it, but I think that pretty much sums up, I think, what is really behind the outbursts that we are seeing in society. But there are 2 points that I would like to briefly make regarding this. Point number one is what we see happening is not new. Violent protests, rioting, looting, these things have been going on, dare I say, for decades in South Africa. We know from time to time the sporadic xenophobic violence that happens and also tends to capture the national imagination and the national psyche. And now we've seen these riots and looting going on over the last few weeks. There are many other examples that we can cite, that we can look at. Now, we have heard time and again when people are asked, why do you resort to violence to make your voices heard? Then the response is pretty much always the same, and that is that violence is the only language that the government understands. So once they feel that they've exhausted all the alternatives, then the only thing that is left, as far as they are concerned, is violence. Because at the very least, if nothing else, what that does is that it does get the media's attention, it does get the attention of those in power, and at least they are able to get the attention of the people who may be ignoring them when they are using more legitimate channels to try and voice their frustrations.
Now, pardon me, you may continue.
Now, I said the second point is, you said that some people will argue, why are we still seeing this anarchy in our society when we are living in a democracy? And the question that I would ask is, what do we mean when we talk about we are living in a democracy? For a very long time, since the 1990s, we've been told as a society that we live in a democracy where our political leadership is accountable to the people. But yet we see time and again various examples throughout history and even in the present, examples of leaders who behave in a way that demonstrates that they are not accountable to the people. So is this a democracy where the leaders are accountable to the people, or is it a democracy where the people are accountable to the leaders? Because it seems that the latter is what these examples are illustrating. The mere fact that people feel that they have to resort to violence, and I will also include that it's not always everybody that is using violence as a means to communicate their dissatisfaction. Sometimes there's also criminality involved. But those who are using violence because they feel that's the only way that they can get those in power to hear them, that seems to me to suggest that the people are actually accountable to the leaders and not the other way around, as it should be in a democracy.
And when one looks at the messaging from government, really, it has been confusing. As you hear from one minister saying we are in control of the situation. We've handed a report here. We are doing this now, and all of that. There's been quite a mixed messaging. Even when there was talk of an insurrection, now another minister says there's no evidence of this. So really speaking in different voices and leaving the nation confused. What impact does this have on the nation itself that is looking to government to be able to then show some kind of control over this situation?
Fear-mongering. Because the more confused you can have a society of people, the more anxiety, the more stress, the more uncertainty, and the greater the levels of fear. And when you have a society of people where most, if not all, are driven by fear, then it becomes a lot easier for those in power to impose the kinds of restrictions and regulations and other measures of systematic control that they perhaps want to use the current difficult situations and circumstances that we are all enduring to try and achieve that. So it's not really surprising because for me, if you think about it logically, it certainly doesn't make sense that you can have ministers who are all part of the same command council, that we would assume that before they have a press conference that they would meet and make sure that they get each other's story straight and that they are all on the same page before they go and speak to the media. But now we have a situation where, as you said, different ministers are contradicting each other and even contradicting the president in certain instances. And for me, that just raises red flags. Is this perhaps a deliberate attempt to confuse the public? And if that is the case, what is the agenda behind that deliberate confusion?
Let's talk about the police's handling of the situation. Some have said that they did well in averting a possible scene of bloodshed, or others are saying no, they were simply too overwhelmed to even be able to cope with the situation on the ground. Which one are you leaning towards?
Once again, let's look at what's happening with the police in the wider context. So we know that there are huge problems in the senior leadership of the police. We know that there are internal battles that are being fought between members of the senior officialdom of the police service. We know that the police service has a big problem with police corruption and criminality. We hear examples almost on a daily basis of police officers that are being accused of crimes or corruption or other kind of illegal or unlawful activity. And this is the context within which we are trying to understand what the police is doing. Now, unfortunately, the fact that we have these two perspectives on how the police has handled the situation once again suggests that there is a level of confusion amongst the public of what to make of the police's activities and how they have gone about dealing with these situations. It certainly doesn't inspire confidence either when we have to also hear and experience the military being brought in to basically perform activities and duties and responsibilities that are not theirs to perform, but that belong exclusively within the realm of the police service. And now we've had this situation happening with these riots and lootings going on, and it's not the police only who dealt with the protesting, but it is also the military that were brought in to assist the police to maintain law and order and to quell the protests. So it's very difficult for me to position myself in either one of those two camps. I prefer to rather take an objective third-person view and look at both sides, but more importantly, looking at the wider context of what is currently happening in the police service.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Prof. Certainly appreciate it. That was Professor Theodore Petrus from the University of the Free State. Let's